everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Plundering multiversal technology, starting from Marvel, Chapter 62 to 73. Chapter 62. Conversation with the Defense Secretary, Conditions 1241 words for advanced chapters /Patreon. com/handsomeduckgod at the Hargrove residence, Marcus heard the front door open, and shoved his phone into his pocket fast enough to pull a muscle. Edmund Hargrove, returning from his morning walk, hung up his coat, and studied his son with the cheerful disapproval of a man who'd earned the right to lecture. "Marcus, I'm not trying to nag, but you should get outside more. Sitting indoors all day is terrible for your health. I just walked 4 flights of stairs without stopping. You were winded after 2. At 91, I'm outperforming you. That's embarrassing." On any other day, Marcus would have fired back. Today he had nothing. Hargrove noticed the missing rebuttal but didn't press it. Instead, he shifted topics. "By the way, is that boy Ethan still buried in that biochemical laboratory?" Marcus's heart lurched. Yes. Yes, still in the laboratory." The old man's eyes narrowed. Something was off with his son's tone. But he filed it away and launched into a familiar grievance. "That kid. I say one nice thing about him, and he loses his bearings entirely. Running off to dabble in biology. Doesn't he know the saying about different fields being different mountains? He's wasting his talent. And the Chancellor is just as bad. Instead of stopping him, he helped the brat borrow a laboratory." Marcus could only offer a bitter smile. "Kid, you need to come back. Otherwise the old man will only have me to yell at from now on." Inside the Aurelian Department of Defense's East Coast branch, Ethan was escorted down a corridor by a formation of agents, so tight he could have reached out and touched 4 of them simultaneously. Before he reached the office, Defense Secretary Callister emerged to greet him personally. The warmth was theatrical. The kind of warmth that powerful men deployed when they wanted something from you and believed the transaction was already in their favor. "Mercer, although we've never met in person, your reputation precedes you. Those 2 inventions, truly miraculous. They've opened my eyes to what's possible." "Don't hit a smiling face." Ethan knew the man harbored intentions that had nothing to do with admiration. But with the signal be broadcasting to a global audience and Frank's safety dependent on not escalating prematurely, he played the part. "Callister, you're too kind." Before he could continue, one of the agents flanking him made a move. The man was fast. His arm swung upward toward the signal be hovering at shoulder height, gun but aimed at the drone's lens, the motion executed with the speed of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of disabling things quickly and quietly. Ethan caught his wrist. Not after the swing. During it. His hand closed around the agent's forearm and stopped the motion dead, like a steel clamp engaging. The agent's eyes went wide. These were elite operatives. Selected from military special forces, then subjected to years of additional training. Any one of them could handle 10 opponents in close quarters. And an 18-year-old had just intercepted a strike that should have been too fast for a civilian to track, let alone stop. Callister's expression flickered. Controlled. The agent whose arm was being held went red. Being stalked by a kid, in front of his colleagues and his commanding officer, was a humiliation that bypassed his training, and went straight to his ego. He pulled back, preparing for a second attempt. Callister's voice was sharp. "Is that how we treat a distinguished guest?" The agent retreated, jaw tight, resentment visible in every line of his body. Ethan released the wrist and turned to Callister with an expression of mild curiosity. "Callister, does this little drone really bother you that much?" He tilted his head. "Or is what we're about to discuss not fit for the world to see?" Callister was caught off guard for a beat, then recovered with a laugh that was genuinely amused. Or at least, a convincing simulation of genuine amusement. "Of course not. Mercer wants to keep his little gadget running, by all means. Let the people of Valoria, and the entire world see how the Aurelian Republic treats its guests. The concession cost Callister nothing. In his assessment, the signal bee was a security blanket. The digital equivalent of a child clutching a stuffed animal in a dark room, convinced that holding it would keep the monsters away. It wouldn't. But letting the kid believe it gave Callister leverage he could use later. The illusion of safety made people careless. The group moved toward the building's conference room. Callister walked beside Ethan, maintaining the performance of casual friendliness that the global broadcast required. "Mercer, you seem to keep yourself in excellent physical condition." The comment was probing. Callister's eyes had registered what his agent's arm had felt. The grip that stopped a trained operative's strike hadn't been the grip of a normal teenager. "That move of my man's just now wasn't gentle. And you stopped it like it was nothing." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at, Mr. Callister?" "Nothing sinister. If you enjoy training, we have a fully equipped gymnasium at Defense Department headquarters. State of the art. You're welcome to use it during your stay." The recruitment pitch was barely disguised. "Stay here. Use our facilities. Get comfortable. Become ours." That's generous. I'd love to explore more of the Aurelian Republic. But the fact that you kidnapped my uncle does cast something of a shadow over the tourism experience. The word kidnapped dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Callister didn't flinch. "Kidnapped? Mercer, I'm not sure where you're getting your information. Frank Holloway is visiting the Aurelian Republic of his own accord. I personally invited him as a guest of the department, out of my deep admiration for the man who raised such an extraordinary talent. How could anyone call that kidnapping?" In the live broadcast, the comment sections detonated. "This man is shameless. Admiration for Mr. Holloway. You wouldn't know a high school principal existed if it weren't for Mercer. I'm genuinely curious whether the armor's laser could even burn through this man's thick skin." The Aurelian Republic's idea of hospitality, tranquilizer rounds and military transport planes. The walk to the conference room continued with the specific awkwardness of two men maintaining a performance of civility while each silently calculated how to destroy the other. When they arrived, Ethan walked directly to the center seat at the conference table and sat down. He looked at the agents lining the walls, at least 20 of them, and frowned. "Callister, I don't like crowds." Callister blinked, then waved his hand. Most of the agents filed out. Only 4 remained. The best of the best, positioned at the room's corners with the relaxed alertness of men who could cross the distance to the table in under a second. Callister didn't think Ethan could threaten him without the armor. A teenager, no matter how gifted, was still a teenager. But leaving a few professionals in the room was basic precaution. Ethan looked at the 4 remaining agents. Looked at Callister. Looked at the signal bee hovering in the corner, its lens catching everything. Then he leaned forward. "Let's stop dancing, Mr. Callister. Here are my conditions." Chapter 63, Frank Holloway's Trust, the Defense Secretary 1338 words for advanced chapters/Patreon. com/handsomeduckgod Callister, let's skip the pleasantries and get to the point. Ethan's voice was level. Business-like. The voice of a man who'd flown across an ocean and wasn't interested in small talk. "The Aurelian Republic wants the 2 technologies I possess. You just need to meet 2 conditions." Callister smiled. The smile of a man who believed he was in total control of the conversation. "Mercer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The Aurelian Republic is a nation built on freedom and equality. We would never covet another person's technology. However, since you have requests, please, as a friend, I'm happy to help however I can." The word friend did approximately 0 work in the room. Every person watching the live broadcast, and every agent standing against the walls, understood that the word meant its opposite. First condition. Ethan held up one finger. "I need to see my uncle. I need to confirm, with my own eyes, that he's safe and unharmed. And he needs to be escorted back to Valoria immediately. Callister didn't hesitate. He'd expected this. The truth was, from the moment Ethan had stepped out of the armor and onto the rooftop, Frank Holloway's utility as a hostage had evaporated. The bait had served its purpose. The target had walked into the building voluntarily. Holding the uncle any longer risked nothing but bad optics on a global broadcast. Of course. Holloway has been under our protection during his stay. As his friend, ensuring his safe return to Valoria is my absolute responsibility. The hypocrisy was so polished it could have been used as a mirror. Within minutes, Frank Holloway was brought into the conference room. Frank looked older than when Ethan had last seen him. The lines around his eyes were deeper, cut by weeks of stress and captivity. He'd lost weight. His clothes were clean. The Aurelian Republic had at least managed the optics of treating their guest presentably, but the way he held himself told a different story. The posture of a former soldier who'd been surrounded by enemies and hadn't dropped his guard once. The moment he saw Ethan sitting at the conference table, two emotions crossed his face in rapid succession. The first was fury. The kind of fury that comes from watching someone you love do the exact thing you were terrified they'd do. Frank had known. The moment the Aurelian agents had put the bag over his head in Greystone Province, he'd known that Ethan would come. That the kid would fly across an ocean alone, walk into a trap, and hand himself over to the people who'd taken his uncle, because that was who Ethan Mercer was. He didn't compromise. He didn't negotiate through proxies. And he didn't leave family behind. Frank had spent every day of his captivity dreading exactly this moment. The second emotion was pride. The specific, painful pride of a man watching his son become exactly the person he'd hoped he'd become, in a situation where that was the worst possible outcome. Ethan saw Frank's expression and instinctively hunched his shoulders. "Uncle Frank, don't get violent." He pointed at the signal bee hovering near the ceiling. "You know what that thing does. The entire country is watching." Frank looked up at the drone. Took a breath so deep it seemed to start in his feet. Let it out. When he spoke, his voice was controlled. The voice of a man communicating something to the only person in the room who would understand it. "Are you sure about this?" 3 words. On the surface, a nonsensical question. Callister frowned. The agents looked confused. In the live broadcast, viewers tilted their heads. But Ethan understood perfectly. Frank wasn't asking if Ethan was sure about coming to the Aurelian Republic. He wasn't asking if Ethan was sure about the negotiation, or the conditions or the risks. He was asking, do you have a plan? A real one. Something these people don't see. Something that means you're not just throwing your life away. Go back without worry. The words were simple. The voice was quiet. But underneath, in the register that only 13 years of shared life could decode, was the answer Frank needed. "I have a plan." Frank looked at his nephew. Held the gaze for 3 full seconds. "Then I'll go back and wait for you." He turned and walked out of the conference room without looking back. Callister's expression darkened. The exchange had been brief. And entirely opaque. He didn't like things he couldn't decode, particularly when they involved the person he was trying to manipulate. But the hostage was leaving. The target was staying. The math still worked. "Mercer, your uncle is on his way to the private jet. He'll be airborne within the hour. Now, I'm curious about your second condition." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "We'll discuss the second condition once my uncle has safely landed in Valoria." "That's a few hours of waiting, Mr. Callister. I hope you don't mind." Callister considered pushing. Decided against it. A few hours was nothing compared to what he stood to gain. And the delay served another purpose. It demonstrated the Aurelian Republic's patience and goodwill on global television. Of course. Your caution is understandable. He settled into his own chair, and apparently deciding that the weight could be put to use, resumed the performance of casual conversation. Mercer, since your verification meeting, you've been rather quiet publicly. What have you been working on? I know you spent time in that biochemical laboratory. I'm curious what drew you there. Ethan smiled faintly. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for this question. Biology, actually. I've been developing a serum designed to enhance human physical capabilities. Callister blinked. He'd heard about this. His intelligence assets in Valoria had reported Ethan's social media announcement weeks ago. At the time, Callister had filed it under teenage bravado and moved on. Everyone, including Callister, had assumed that when the Bureau whisked Ethan away to a secret location, the kid was working on physics. The reactor. The armor. Something in his wheelhouse. The idea that Ethan had actually spent a month doing biology research was unexpected. Has the Valerian government lost its mind? Letting a physics prodigy waste time on biochemistry. In the live broadcast, the audience groaned. He's actually admitting it on international television. The biology thing. Making us lose face worldwide. Famous too young. Lost his head. Callister, recovering from his surprise, offered a diplomatic response. Mercer, I might suggest focusing on your strengths. Physics is clearly where your talent lies. Biology is a very different field. The condescension was gentle but unmistakable. And behind it, Callister felt his confidence in the negotiation settle into something closer to certainty. This kid wasn't a seasoned operative. He wasn't a political veteran. He was a teenager who'd wandered into biology because someone on the internet made fun of his test scores, and he'd been too proud to let it go. Brilliant in one narrow field. Childish in everything else. Callister had broken-hearted people. Smarter people. People who didn't voluntarily reveal their insecurities to the person sitting across the table. This was going to be simple. Ethan, watching Callister's expression settle into complacent certainty, felt a familiar warmth in his chest. The same warmth he'd felt when the reporters at the verification meeting had called the armor a useless robot. The same warmth he'd felt when the anti-fans had said he couldn't do biology. The warmth of being underestimated by someone who was about to learn, in the most public way possible, that they were wrong. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Wake me when my uncle lands. For the next several hours, the conference room was silent. Just as Ethan was about to drift off, a phone rang. Chapter 64, Ethan's second condition, terrifying physical prowess. 1581 words for advanced chapters/Patreon. com/handsomeduckgod. The phone rang, and Ethan answered before it finished its first tone. Director Graves. On the other end, Graves was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something Ethan hadn't heard before, relief so intense it sounded like exhaustion. Your uncle has been picked up. He's safe. Don't worry. The weight that had been sitting on Ethan's chest since the day he'd seen the Academic Exchange article lifted. Not partially. Completely. Like a hand releasing a fist. Frank was home. Take care of yourself over there. Don't worry about me, Director. When I get back, you owe me a feast. The good stuff. None of that cafeteria slop. Graves, hearing the casual irreverence from a teenager sitting inside the Aurelian Republic's Department of Defense surrounded by armed agents, didn't feel a shred of annoyance. He knew this situation was the Bureau's failure. The Whitfield family had exploited moles that the Bureau should have caught years ago. 14 agents were dead. Frank had been snatched from under their protection. However the kid chose to talk to him right now, Graves would take it. When you get back, I'll personally host the dinner. Standing nearby, Callister listened to the phone conversation with a tightening jaw. The kid was talking about going home for dinner. As if this were a day trip. As if the full weight of the Aurelian Republic's military and intelligence apparatus weren't standing between him and the exit. The arrogance of it was almost offensive. "Mercer, you can state your second condition now." Ethan ended the call and looked at Callister. "Don't be in such a rush, Mr. Callister. The second condition is simple. But I need 2 people in the room before I say it. Bring Edgar and Conrad Whitfield here." Callister's eyebrows rose slightly, but he gave the order. Under the Signal B's live broadcast, the appearance of the Whitfield brothers on Aurelian soil was a propaganda gift. Proof that a senior Valerian political family had voluntarily chosen the Aurelian Republic over their own country. Every second of their presence on camera was a message to the world about which nation people really wanted to live in. Within minutes, the Whitfield brothers were escorted into the conference room. Edgar entered with the rigid composure of a man who'd decided to show nothing. Conrad entered with the swagger of a man who still hadn't understood his situation. Ethan looked at them. The men who'd orchestrated his uncle's kidnapping. Who'd had 14 bureau agents killed. Who'd sold their country for green cards and a bank transfer. Callister. Ethan's voice was calm. "My condition is simple. Kill these 2 men. And I'll give you everything you want." The conference room went very quiet. Before Callister could respond, Conrad Whitfield laughed. "You must be Ethan Mercer." He stepped forward, chin raised, the posture of a man who still believed his family name meant something. "I think you've lost your mind. You actually believe you can have us killed. The reason our family fell to this point is entirely because of an ungrateful brat like you." Callister looked at Conrad the way a person looks at a fly that's landed on their food. The man had been in the Aurelian Republic for weeks, and still hadn't grasped the fundamental shift in his position. He was no longer a political patriarch's brother. He was a refugee with a limited shelf life. But the condition itself required consideration. If the Signal Bee hadn't been broadcasting, Callister might have agreed. The Whitfield family's intelligence value was already extracted. Their political connections in Valoria were severed. Killing 2 spent assets in exchange for fusion and battle armor technology was, by any rational calculation, an excellent trade. But the broadcast changed the math. Billions of people were watching. If the Aurelian Republic executed 2 men on camera to acquire foreign technology, the damage would be catastrophic. Every defector in the world would reconsider. Every ally would distance themselves. The Republic's image as a free and equal nation would become a punchline. "Mercer, I'm afraid I can't agree to this condition. The Aurelian Republic is a nation of laws and liberty. We do not permit the killing of anyone under our protection." "Can't agree. Then there's nothing more to discuss." Ethan stood up from his chair and began stretching. Neck rolls. Shoulder rotations. Deep knee bends. The kind of warm-up routine you'd see from an athlete preparing for a sprint. In the conference room of the Aurelian Republic's Department of Defense. Surrounded by elite agents. On global live television. Conrad burst out laughing. "What are you doing? Planning to perform calisthenics for us? Don't tell me you think you can fight your way out of here with your bare hands." In the live broadcast, the comments exploded. "What is Mercer doing? He's not actually going to try to fight his way out of the Aurelian Department of Defense. It's over." The pressure finally broke him. This isn't a movie. 1 person against trained special forces doesn't happen in reality. At the bureau, Graves and the Chancellor stared at the screen with matching expressions of bewilderment. At the Hargrove residence, Marcus watched with sweat forming on his palms. "Big brother, you can't be this reckless. Making a move in a place like this." Callister nearly laughed out loud. In his entire career, nobody had ever attempted to escape the Department of Defense through physical force. It was so absurd it was almost charming. He glanced at his agents and gave a slight nod. "Be careful. Don't hurt our distinguished guest." The four agents cracked their knuckles and stepped forward, spreading into a loose semicircle. Cold smiles. Relaxed postures. The body language of professionals who considered this a minor nuisance, not a threat. Ethan continued his squats. Didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge them. But the corner of his mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Callister, it seems you really weren't listening to me earlier." The agents were 3 meters away. "I believe I mentioned that I've been researching a serum to enhance human physical capabilities." 2 meters. You didn't actually think. 1 meter. That was a joke. Callister's expression changed. But before the change could reach his mouth, before he could say, wait, or stop, or anything at all, the muscles in Ethan's legs contracted with a force that cracked the floor tile beneath his feet. He vanished. Not moved quickly. Vanished. The human eye tracks motion by processing sequential images. When an object moves faster than the eye can generate those images, it doesn't appear to move. It disappears from one location and appears in another. Ethan appeared between 2 agents. His palms hit their chests simultaneously. Not punches. Open-handed strikes, delivered with the controlled precision of someone who understood exactly how much force was needed and didn't want to use more. The agents flew. Not stumbled. Not staggered. Backward off their feet, across the width of the conference room, and into the far wall with an impact that cracked the plaster and shook the paintings off their hooks. They hit the floor and didn't get up. The remaining 2 agents froze. The 3-second engagement had bypassed their training entirely. Their reflexes, their positioning, their years of combat experience, none of it had been relevant. They hadn't even seen the kid move. In the conference room, nobody breathed. The live broadcast was nuclear. What was that? Did I just hallucinate? He sent 2 200-pound Special Forces agents flying. That's 400 pounds of trained muscle launched 10 meters into a wall. The serum. The serum is real. The enhancement of human capabilities, it's real. Professor Mercer is a genius in biology too. Every hater who said he couldn't do it needs to eat their words right now. At the bureau, Director Graves slowly lowered himself into his chair. That kid wasn't joking. He actually built the serum. He actually injected it. Chancellor Thayer, standing beside him, stared at the screen with an expression that contained the very specific emotion of a man who'd given a teenager 300 million marks as an education in humility, and was now watching that teenager throw elite agents across a room with his bare hands. 300 million marks. The best investment this government has ever made. At the Hargrove residence, Marcus's mouth was open. His phone was in his hand. His entire body was motionless. His brain, trained to analyze human kinetics for 30 years, was running calculations that didn't produce answers that existed in any textbook he'd ever read. The force required to accelerate 200-pound masses to that velocity from a standing position. The reaction time required to close a 3-meter gap faster than trained operatives could react. The muscle density required to generate that kind of power without skeletal damage. None of it was possible. Not for a human being. Not for any human being who had ever lived. Unless the human being in question was no longer operating within normal biological parameters. The serum works. It actually works. In the conference room, Edgar Whitfield had gone the color of old paper. Conrad had stopped laughing. Ethan shook his right arm, working out the sting of the impacts, and turned to face the defense secretary. Still think my work in biology was a joke? He tilted his head. Callister. Chapter 65, Revenge Operation, Escape from the Aurelian Republic 1595 words. For advanced chapters /Patreon.com/HandsomeDuckGod. Looking into Ethan's calm eyes, Callister felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This kid wasn't bluffing. Whatever he'd done to those agents, he was ready to do it again. He snapped back to reality a second later. Whatever the kid had done to those agents, Callister was still the defense secretary of the Aurelian Republic, and there were hundreds of armed operatives in this building. One phone call. His hand went for his pocket. Ethan picked up a pen from the conference table. The super soldier serum's enhancement wasn't limited to brute strength and raw speed. It extended to precision. Motor control. The fine-grained neuromuscular calibration that turned a general physical upgrade into something far more dangerous, the ability to put any object, traveling at any speed, exactly where you wanted it. The pen left Ethan's hand. It crossed the conference room at a velocity that made it blur. Callister screamed. The pen punched through the center of his right palm, clean through the flesh and bone, and continued into the phone in his grip with enough residual force to embed itself in the device's circuitry. Hand and phone, destroyed in one throw. The agents. The Whitfield brothers. Every person in the room stared at the hole in Callister's hand, at the pen protruding from the ruined phone, and the mathematics of what had just happened rewired their understanding of the situation. Thrown with enough force and accuracy to pierce a human hand and disable an electronic device. From a standing position. Without a wind-up. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a weapon. Nobody spoke. Because there were still a lot of pens on that table. Ethan smiled apologetically. Sorry about that, Mr. Callister. But until I've finished handling some personal business, I'd rather not have company. Callister, clutching his bleeding hand, was sweating through his shirt. For the first time in his career, he hated this conference room. Why were there so many pens? Why was the soundproofing so effective? Why had he been arrogant enough to bring in only 4 unarmed agents? But nobody could have predicted that a teenager who'd voluntarily left his armor would still be the most dangerous person in the building. Ethan turned from Callister and walked toward the Whitfield brothers. Edgar and Conrad stood at the far end of the conference table, frozen. Edgar's composure, the glacial control he'd maintained through decades of political warfare, had cracked like ice over a river. Conrad was on the floor, having lost the ability to stand the moment the agents hit the wall. You committed 2 crimes. Ethan's voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't need volume because the room was already silent. First, you defiled the dignity that generations of Valorians built with their blood. A founding family selling their country to a foreign power. Your father would have killed you himself if he'd lived to see it. Second, you targeted my family. He stopped in front of Edgar. That was the mistake you don't get to walk away from. Edgar's face twisted. The mask of the composed patriarch, maintained through cabinet meetings and defection negotiations and the striking of a bound prisoner, finally shattered. So what if you kill us? You'll still be imprisoned in this country for the rest of your life. He grabbed a chair and swung it at Ethan's head with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left. Ethan caught the chair with one hand. Pulled it away. Set it down. Then his hands moved to Edgar's head with a speed that made the motion look gentle. The crack was brief and final. Edgar Whitfield, patriarch of the Whitfield political dynasty, traitor to the Republic of Valoria, collapsed to the floor. Conrad, watching his brother die from 3 feet away, made a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a scream. Please, it wasn't my idea. He made me, Zhang, Edgar made me do everything. A dark stain spread across the floor beneath him. Ethan looked at the man who'd stood over Frank Holloway's unconscious body in Greystone Province and said, whether my family makes it to the Aurelian Republic depends on how much weight you carry in that boy's heart. If you knew it would end like this, Ethan said, you shouldn't have started. Conrad's neck broke as cleanly as his brother's. The live broadcast had been running the entire time. The signal bee, hovering in its corner, had captured every second. The pen throw. The approach. The executions. All of it, transmitted in real time to every screen that was connected to Ryan Calloway's feed. The reaction was everything you'd expect when a global audience watches a teenager kill two men with his bare hands on live television. Professor Mercer those traitors got exactly what they deserved. Vermin who sell out their country deserve nothing less. Don't celebrate yet. He's still inside the Aurelian Republic's Department of Defense. How is he getting out? That question sobered everyone instantly. In the conference room, Ethan took a breath. Then another. The Whitfield brothers were dead. Frank was safe. 2 of the 3 objectives for this trip were complete. The third, getting home. There was a ready-made solution standing 3 feet away, clutching a bleeding hand, and looking at Ethan like a rabbit looks at a wolf. Callister saw the gaze shift toward him, and the blood drained from his face so fast it was visible. You can't, don't worry, Mr. Callister. I'm not going to kill you. You're going to help me leave. Before Callister could formulate a response, he tried one more play. Even if you take me hostage, my subordinates are already on their way. Your signal bee has been broadcasting everything. They know exactly what happened in here. And your armor. His voice steadied slightly as he found leverage. My people are moving it right now. By the time you reach the roof, it'll be gone. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. Confirmation, someone was indeed relocating the Mark II from the rooftop landing zone. For a moment he was still. Callister, mistaking the pause for hesitation, pressed his advantage. Surrender, mister, you have no way out. My agents outside this door are fully armed. You may be fast, but can you dodge bullets? Sit down. Let's talk. The Aurelian Republic will offer you treatment. That Ethan moved. The remaining 2 agents in the conference room had been standing with the rigid alertness of men who'd watched their colleagues get destroyed, and were trying very hard not to be next. They weren't fast enough. Ethan closed the distance to the first one and drove a fist into his abdomen with precisely enough force to shut down his nervous system without killing him. The agent folded and hit the floor. The second agent reacted. Training kicked in. He shifted his weight, raised his guard, started a counterattack. Ethan caught his arm, pivoted, and lifted. 220 pounds of trained operative, raised off the ground with one hand, held overhead for a single second that communicated everything words couldn't, and then hurled across the room into the far wall. The impact shook the floor. Callister, watching a man get thrown like a piece of furniture by a teenager who weighed 50 pounds less, finally understood something that had been eluding him since the beginning of this meeting. He was not in control. He had never been in control. From the moment Ethan Mercer had landed on his rooftop, everything that had happened had been according to the kid's plan, not his. Ethan walked to Callister, gripped the back of his collar, and pulled him to his feet. Let's go, Mr. Secretary. You're going to walk me out of this building. Outside the conference room, dozens of fully armed agents lined the corridor. They'd heard the screams. They'd seen the signal bee footage on their own devices. They knew their boss was in there with a superhuman, who'd just killed 2 people, and disabled 4 elite operatives in under a minute. They didn't breach. Because their direct superior was still inside, and the last thing anyone wanted was to be responsible for getting the defense secretary killed. They waited. Weapons raised. Eyes on the door. Then the door exploded outward. Not opened. Not pushed. Kicked off its hinges with a force that sent the reinforced steel slab spinning into the corridor like a giant playing card. The agents closest to the door were knocked flat by the impact. The smoke cleared. Ethan Mercer walked out of the conference room holding Defense Secretary Andrew Callister by the collar, the man's bleeding hand hanging at his side, his face the specific shade of gray that comes from understanding that your life is no longer in your own hands. The corridor was packed. Wall to wall. Armed agents. Automatic weapons. Body armor. The full response of a Department of Defense branch that had just watched its most secure conference room get dismantled by a single person. Ethan surveyed the corridor. Counted the agents. Noted the weapons. Calculated angles and distances with a mind that was running faster and cleaner than it ever had before the serum. Then he looked at Callister, dangling from his grip like a scarecrow, and smiled. Secretary, your subordinates are truly enthusiastic. Chapter 66. Chapter 66. The Defense Secretary becomes a hostage, jumping off the building. 1467 words for advanced chapters/Patreon. com/handsomeduck. The agents in the corridor saw their target and raised their weapons. Ethan didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on Callister's collar by about 30%. Enough to communicate the relevant information without words. Easy, everyone. His voice carried down the corridor, calm and conversational. You wouldn't want your boss to die in the line of duty because someone got trigger-happy. Callister, feeling the grip compress his windpipe from comfortable to concerning, made the executive decision to stay alive. Put the guns down. Do you want me to die in this hallway? The agents hesitated. Looked at each other. Then, one by one, lowered their muzzles. Smart choice. Ethan moved forward, dragging Callister with him. Since nobody's going to shoot, you can all watch me leave. He pushed through the formation toward the elevator at the end of the corridor. The agents parted around him like water around a stone, weapons lowered, faces tight, every one of them doing the math on whether any shot they could take would end the situation before the kid snapped their boss's neck. The math didn't work. They stayed still. The elevator was an external unit, glass-walled, attached to the building's facade. Through the panoramic windows, Ethan could see the ground floor far below. No personnel visible. Just a large, oddly shaped transport truck parked at the building's base. He stepped into the elevator, hauling Callister with him, and pulled out his phone. The armor's tracking signal was moving. Heading away from the building on a ground-level route. They'd loaded the Mark II onto the truck. They were taking it somewhere else. Give up, Mr. Callister's voice was strained but regaining some of its composure. Your armor is on that transport vehicle, heading to a secure facility. By the time you reach the ground floor, it'll be kilometers away. You have no armor. No weapons. Surrender is your only option. As if to punctuate the point, the elevator shuddered and stopped. Someone had cut the power. The car hung motionless between floors, roughly 10 stories up. Through the glass walls, Ethan watched the transport truck pulling away from the building. His armor was on it. Every second that passed was another 100 meters of distance. They reacted fast, Ethan muttered. Callister, sensing the shift in momentum, straightened up despite the pain in his hand. Mercer, you must understand that holding me hostage won't get you out of this building. I'm not valuable enough to trade for someone like you. Even if you held the president himself, the Aurelian Republic would not let the most important collection of military technologies on the planet walk out the door. Ethan said nothing. Callister pressed harder. But here's what I can offer. Stay in the Aurelian Republic. Work with us. Contribute your talents to a nation that will give you everything you could ever want. Resources. Facilities. Freedom to research anything you choose. And in return for your cooperation, we can put today's unpleasantness behind us entirely. In the live broadcast, the Valerian audience exploded. This man has absolutely no shame. Thrown away every pretense. Just openly recruiting a Valerian national on global television. This is what freedom and equality looks like. Kidnapping and extortion. Professor Mercer is trapped. Even with the serum, he can't fight his way out of a building full of armed agents without the armor. I have an IQ of 180, and I can't see how he gets out of this. The person above needs to stop lying about their IQ. While the live broadcast mourned, Ethan was looking at the ceiling of the elevator car. Steel panel. Industrial grade. Designed to support maintenance workers and equipment loads. He reached up, gripped the edge of the panel, and pulled. The steel screamed. Rivets popped like buttons off a shirt. The metal buckled, folded, and then tore free in Ethan's hands, a ragged sheet of industrial steel roughly the size of a door, separated from the elevator's ceiling by raw grip strength. Callister stared. The live broadcast stared. He just ripped a steel panel off the ceiling with his bare hands. The serum. This is the serum. That technology isn't just as important as the armor, it might be more important. If this were deployed across a military, the implications are, is he building a shield? Callister, watching this display of impossible strength from 3 feet away, felt two things simultaneously: terror at what the kid could do to him, and greed at what the kid's knowledge was worth. 3 technologies. All in one teenager's head. If the Aurelian Republic could acquire even one of them, the global balance of power would shift. All 3. The word superpower would need a new definition. But the next thing Ethan did killed every thought in Callister's mind except one. Ethan hefted the steel plate, angled it beneath him like a surfboard, and looked at the panoramic glass wall of the elevator. 10 stories up. The ground below was concrete and asphalt. "Watch closely, Mr. Secretary." Ethan grinned. "I'm about to do something fun." He drove the steel plate through the tempered glass. The wall shattered outward in a cascade of fragments that caught the light like a waterfall of broken diamonds. Cold air rushed into the elevator car. And Ethan Mercer, holding a torn sheet of industrial steel beneath his feet, stepped off the edge. 10 stories of empty air. Callister lunged for the opening, clutching the broken frame with his good hand, staring down at the falling figure. His political career flashed before his eyes. The president's reaction. The technologies lost. 3 revolutionary inventions smeared across a parking lot because the kid chose death over cooperation. In the live broadcast, the reaction was immediate and devastating. He jumped. No, no, no. Professor Mercer would rather die than help them. In order to keep the secrets safe, he chose a real hero. The country should honor him as a martyr. Seconded. At the Bureau headquarters, Director Graves watched the screen and felt something inside him break. The kid had jumped. Rather than let the Aurelian Republic have his knowledge, he'd thrown himself off a building. 18 years old. The most brilliant mind in Valerian history. And Graves' failure, the Bureau's failure, had put him in a position where dying was the better option. Fuguatai, you claimed to serve the Republic, and in the end you lost a once-in-a-generation genius. This mistake alone is enough to condemn you for the rest of your life. He was already composing his resignation letter in his head when the broadcast changed. The steel plate hit the ground first. The impact was enormous. The plate buckled on contact, absorbing a fraction of the kinetic energy before pancaking against the asphalt. Sparks flew. A crater formed. And the figure that landed on top of it stumbled, rolled, and lay still. Did his finger just move? You're seeing things. That's 10 stories. Nobody survives 10 stories. It moved again. Ethan Mercer stood up. Painfully. Not the casual way he'd stood up in the crater after the missile strike. This hurt. Jumping 10 stories, even with the serum, even with the steel plate absorbing some of the impact, subjected his body to forces that would have killed any baseline human 3 times over. But the serum had done what it was designed to do. Enhanced muscle density absorbed the shock. Reinforced bone structure held under the impact. The damage was limited to surface scrapes and bruises that were already beginning to heal faster than they should have. He rolled his shoulders. Flexed his hands. Checked his legs. Everything worked. A slight improvement to various functions of the human body. That was how he'd described the serum on social media. A slight improvement. He'd just survived a 10-story fall, and was standing on his own 2 feet. In the elevator, 10 stories up, Defense Secretary Andrew Callister pressed his face against the broken glass and stared at the teenager, who was brushing dust off his clothes on the ground below. His eyes were wide enough to show white all around the iris. He remembered the social media post. The one that had made him laugh. The one where a 17-year-old had promised to slightly enhance various functions of the human body. What the fuck? The words came out involuntarily, in a voice that was not the voice of a defense secretary, but the voice of a man whose understanding of reality had just been invalidated. God must be joking with me. And then he saw what Ethan was walking toward. Chapter 67, Terrifying Running Speed, the rearview mirror wore God 1203 words. For advanced chapters /patreon.com/handsomeduckgod. Under the disbelieving eyes of the world, Ethan Mercer started running. Not jogging. Not sprinting in the way a normal human sprints. Running with a fluidity and acceleration that didn't belong in a body that had just fallen 10 stories. In the live broadcast, the Valerian audience lost its collective mind. Is he a god? 30 meters. He fell 30 meters and he's running. The serum is the most terrifying thing he's ever built. In the stuck elevator, Callister watched the figure shrink below him, and felt the greed hit before the rational thought could catch up. Then his phone rang. Hello, Mr. President. President Wolf's voice was ragged with adrenaline. Andrew, I don't care what it costs. You will capture Mercer alive. Battle armor plus this serum. Our global position would be unassailable for a century. Callister guaranteed results, hung up, and grabbed his communicator. All units pursuing Mercer, switch to tranquilizer rounds only. I repeat, non-lethal munitions only. Bring him back alive. Anyone who kills him answers to the president personally. Over 100 agents mobilized from the building, piling into pursuit vehicles that peeled out of the parking structure with enough urgency to leave rubber on the concrete. Callister, watching the chase begin from his elevated cage, finally exhaled. Too many reversals today. Time to end this. On the streets of the Aurelian Republic's eastern seaboard, Ethan ran. The serum was still new. He'd injected it less than 48 hours ago, and this was the first time he'd pushed his body at full capacity in an open environment. The power was there, enormous and unfamiliar, like driving a car with an engine 10 times larger than anything you'd practiced with. His legs found a rhythm. His breathing stabilized. His muscles, restructured at the cellular level, responded to commands with a speed and precision that made his old body feel like it had been running in sand. The control came fast. Faster than he'd expected. The serum hadn't just upgraded his body. It had upgraded his ability to learn how to use it. In the live broadcast, a viewer noticed something. Is it my imagination, or have the cars around him slowed down? Someone stopping to give him a ride. In the middle of a government pursuit. Nobody's that brave. Then explain what I'm seeing. The Signal B's camera pulled back. And the truth became visible. The cars hadn't slowed down. Ethan had sped up. The vehicles on the road were moving at standard urban speeds. 50 kilometers per hour at minimum, given the traffic flow. And the figure running between them was keeping pace. Matching their velocity. Exceeding it. A human being was running at 50 kilometers per hour on a public road, and the number was still climbing. 50 km/h. That's faster than the world sprint record by a massive margin. Even animals don't run like this. He's matching cars. The serum didn't slightly enhance anything. It rebuilt him from the ground up. At the Hargrove residence, the cup in Marcus's hand hit the floor. He didn't notice. Jumping from the 10th floor. Now sprinting at speeds that exceeded every recorded human performance by an order of magnitude. He didn't need calculations to understand what this meant. The serum was, pound for pound, potentially more revolutionary than the armor. The armor could be taken away. The serum was permanent. Irreversible. A biological upgrade that turned a single human into something the military would need to reclassify. His father had called Ethan's biology project a waste of talent. Marcus himself had assumed the kid was being impulsive. The real fool was me. Ahead, the transport truck carrying the Mark II was doing its best to create distance. The driver, a veteran who'd spent years hauling classified equipment under pressure, prided himself on his nerves of steel. Those nerves were currently failing. In his rearview mirror, a teenager was chasing his truck. At highway speed. He'd survived ambushes. He'd outrun pursuit vehicles. He'd transported warheads through hostile territory without blinking. But nothing in his career had prepared him for the sight of a kid running down a moving truck like it was standing still. Am I dreaming, or is God dreaming? The agents guarding the truck's cargo bed didn't have time for existential questions. They saw the figure closing and opened fire. Tranquilizer darts. Dozens of them. A wall of needles trailing their targets through the air. But the road was crowded. Civilian vehicles provided cover. And the moment the agents raised their weapons, Ethan ducked behind a car moving in the adjacent lane, using it as a rolling shield. The darts pinged off metal and asphalt. Not a single one hit. The agents were trained for this. They'd fire, reload, fire again. Standard suppression protocol against a moving target. But Ethan had already identified the gap. The reload. The moment the lead agent ejected his spent magazine, Ethan burst from behind the car. Full speed. Closing the distance to the truck with an acceleration that made the previous pace look casual. But first, he needed something to throw. His hand closed on the driver's side mirror of the car he'd been hiding behind. The mounting bracket snapped like a breadstick. The mirror came free in his hand, a roughly 1 kilogram piece of glass and plastic. A rearview mirror. Not exactly a regulation weapon. He waited for a fraction of a second, calculated the angle, the windage, the truck's speed relative to his own. Then he threw. The mirror left his hand like a shell from a cannon. It crossed the gap between Ethan and the truck in less time than the agent had to register that something was incoming. The glass and plastic projectile hit the agent's center mass with the kinetic energy of a car crash. The agent didn't just fall. He was launched off the truck bed, taking the tailgate door with him, tumbling across the asphalt in a heap of limbs and body armor and absolute incomprehension. The driver who'd been watching in the mirror nearly put the truck into a ditch. What did I just see? The agent fired 100 rounds. Kid was fine. Kid through a rearview mirror. Agent is gone. So is the door. I need to quit this job. Go find a construction site. Carry bricks. Something normal. In the live broadcast, watching Ethan tear through the streets of the Aurelian Republic's own capital like a one-man army, the Valerian audience reached a state of euphoria that transcended normal fandom. Professor Mercer is the greatest human being alive. Chasing down Aurelian agents on Aurelian soil. On their streets. In their city. Some countries have movie action heroes. We have the real thing. I hereby nominate Professor Mercer for the title, The Rearview Mirror War God. Seconded. Professor Mercer is the GOAT. Ethan, running at 60 kilometers per hour down a foreign highway with the wind in his face, and a transport truck getting closer with every stride, couldn't hear the comments. But if he could, he would have appreciated the nickname. The truck was 20 meters ahead. He was gaining. Chapter 68, Chapter 68, A Stalemate, The Race Against Time 1143 words for advanced chapters /Patreon. com/handsome duck. God Callister listened to the truck driver's trembling report, and felt his jaw lock. The serum wasn't just an enhancement. It was an evolution. Based on the data streaming in from the pursuit, the speed, the strength, the thrown objects that hit like artillery, This kid was fully deserving of a title that Callister's rational mind didn't want to accept but couldn't deny: the strongest living thing on the surface of the planet. Barehanded. No weapons. Just biology that had been rewritten by a genius who'd been told he couldn't do biology. If this serum were mass-produced across a military, Callister killed that thought before it could finish and started giving orders. Contact the transportation authority. I want the entire street cleared. Every civilian vehicle off the road. His staff scrambled. And get me St. John's Hospital. I need their helicopter. Pilot on the pad, rotors spinning, ready for immediate departure. The hospital administrator on the other end of the line heard the defense secretary's voice and didn't ask questions. Within minutes, a helicopter was being prepped. Callister called the truck driver one more time. Change of destination. John's Hospital. Full speed. A helicopter will be waiting. Get the armor on that chopper and off the ground. He set the phone down and watched the signal bees feed. The red dot that was Ethan Mercer, running at 60 kilometers per hour through the streets of his own capital. A cold smile. Little rat. Once the armor is airborne, your options drop to zero. Unless your serum lets you fly. And I don't think it does. Ethan noticed the traffic thinning and understood immediately. Callister had cleared the road. No more civilian vehicles meant no more rolling cover, no more rearview mirrors to rip off, no more obstacles between the truck and open highway. Without traffic, the truck could accelerate to full speed. And 60 kilometers per hour, impressive as it was for a human being, wasn't enough to catch a truck running flat out. He needed to act before the road emptied completely. Two cars still remained within reach, their drivers frozen in confusion at the rapidly developing situation around them. Ethan sprinted alongside one, tore off both side mirrors in 2 quick motions and threw. Both mirrors hit the truck's rear tires. The enhanced precision turned automotive accessories into anti-vehicle weapons. Both tires blew simultaneously. The truck lurched, fishtailed, and its speed dropped from highway pace to a wounded crawl. Ethan surged forward. He was 10 meters behind. Then the pursuit vehicles arrived. 6 cars, carrying over 20 agents, roared up from behind and fanned out between Ethan and the crippled truck. Windows dropped. Tranquilizer guns appeared. Callister's voice screamed through their communicators, "Do not let that truck stop. Keep the kid back. Suppress his movement." The darts started flying. Ethan's enhanced visual processing tracked each one. The projectiles were slower than bullets, couldn't fire in sustained bursts, and couldn't create an effective suppression pattern. Dodging them individually wasn't hard. But dodging them while sprinting at top speed, with no cover, against 20 shooters working in coordinated volleys. That was a different problem. His speed dropped. He could maintain pursuit, staying behind the truck, but he couldn't close the gap. Stalemate. The truck limped forward on 2 blown tires. Ethan ran behind it. The pursuit vehicles flanked him, firing continuously, keeping him at arm's length. Callister watched the stalemate with satisfaction. Stalemate was exactly what he wanted. The truck didn't need to outrun the kid. It just needed to reach the hospital helipad. The helicopter would do the rest. In Valoria, Graves watched the same feed with the opposite emotion. "Kid, I don't know what they're planning, but a stalemate is the worst outcome for you. You need to break through before whatever they've arranged catches up." The minutes crawled. Then the truck turned into St. John's Hospital's parking complex, and the helipad came into view. A helicopter sat on the pad, rotors already turning, the pilot visible through the canopy. 2 ground crews stood beside it, ready to load. The truck stopped in front of the pad. The driver, who had survived the most traumatic day of his professional life, threw the vehicle into park and collapsed against his steering wheel. The pursuit vehicle screeched to a halt behind Ethan, forming a wall between him and the helipad. Over 20 agents piled out and assumed a blocking formation, weapons raised, faces set. Callister's voice crackled through every communicator. Everyone, you hold that line until the armor is loaded onto the helicopter. Whatever it takes. Whatever it costs. Even if it costs your lives. Do you understand? 20 agents took a collective breath and set their jaws. They'd been trained for this. Sacrifice for the mission. Hold the line until the objective was complete. Ethan looked past the wall of agents at the helicopter. Its rotors were accelerating. Ground crew was already opening the truck's remaining cargo door. He understood Callister's plan now. Get the armor airborne. Once it was in the sky, Ethan had no way to follow. No flight capability. A super soldier who couldn't fly was just a very dangerous man standing on the ground. He needed to get through 20 agents, reach the helicopter, and secure the armor before it took off. His eyes found a metal signpost at the edge of the hospital parking lot. Thick steel post, bolted into concrete. He grabbed it with both hands and bent it. The metal screamed. The concrete base cracked. The post came free, trailing chunks of foundation, and in Ethan's hands it became something between a staff and a battering ram. The iron scraped against the asphalt as he dragged it into a fighting stance. The sound was sharp enough to make the closest agents flinch. Ethan's eyes went cold. Let's see who's faster. His legs fired. The acceleration was so explosive that, for the agents watching, he seemed to vanish and reappear 3 meters closer. Then 5. Then at their line. Don't save ammunition. If you want to live, suppress him. Reinforcements ARE, the signpost hit the lead agent across the chest like a baseball bat connecting with a fastball. The man went airborne. Not stumbled, not staggered, not knocked back. He flew 10 meters sideways and cratered the hood of a parked car with enough force to deploy its airbags. The remaining agents stared at the bent car hood, and the motionless body draped across it. Ethan showed his teeth. Not a smile. Something closer to what the agent's ancestors would have recognized from encounters with predators that outclassed them completely. If we're going to fight, let's fight. Why all the talking? He hefted the signpost. Who's next? Chapter 69, New Fan FIC Marvel, making movie to shop in system. Leo Hayes transmigrated into the Marvel Universe and woke up as the owner of a film studio that was about to go under. Lucky for him, he also woke up with the movie Dream Factory system. Every film Leo shoots, he can spend the box office gross to redeem any item, technology, or ability that appeared in it. Superman, Star Wars, Transformers etc. Chapter 70, Chapter 69, Fight at the Hospital, A31511 words for advanced chapters /Patreon. com/handsomeduckgod. The staff and patients of St. John's Hospital watched the parking lot through their windows with the collective expression of people who were genuinely unsure whether they needed medical attention or the scene outside did. Did I just see that correctly? That young man swung someone 20 meters through the air. A nurse standing nearby said nothing. The look on her face said everything. Is this a movie? Are they filming something? No cameras. And nobody warned us they'd be turning the hospital parking lot into an action set. Then how do you explain what I'm looking at? Ethan's mood was excellent. That swing had been deeply satisfying in a way he hadn't anticipated. The signpost, the follow-through, the trajectory of the agent sailing across the parking lot and into the car hood. No wonder people enjoyed baseball. This was the same principle, just with significantly higher stakes and a considerably heavier bat. He kept these thoughts strictly internal. Saying them out loud would have been poor form. But the clock was ticking. The helicopter's rotors were accelerating. Ground crew was opening the truck's cargo doors. Every second spent enjoying the moment was a second the armor got closer to being airborne. The remaining agents, having watched their colleague become a human projectile, had reorganized. 3-man teams, back to back, covering all angles. No blind spots. Coordinated fields of fire. Professional, disciplined, and terrified. Tranquilizer darts filled the air. Ethan dodged. His enhanced visual processing tracked each dart's trajectory. His reaction time turned what should have been a wall of needles into a sequence of individual threats, each one avoidable with a shift of weight or a turn of the shoulder. But the coordinated fire was pushing him back. Buying time. Exactly what Callister needed. So Ethan changed tactics. He shifted his grip on the signpost. Forehand to reverse. The close combat weapon became a javelin. He planted his back foot, rotated his hips, and threw. The signpost left his hand with a sound like a whip crack. The aerodynamics were terrible. A bent steel rod with chunks of concrete still attached wasn't designed for flight, but at this velocity, aerodynamics were irrelevant. The rod traveled in a straight line because the force behind it was too great for air resistance to matter. It punched through the first 3-man team without slowing. Then the second. Then embedded itself in a concrete wall 30 meters beyond, sunk a foot deep, wisps of heat rising from the friction. 6 agents. In one throw. The remaining agents looked at the steel rod protruding from the wall, at the bodies of their colleagues, and felt something they'd been trained to suppress but couldn't: raw animal fear. This wasn't combat. This wasn't a tactical engagement with an adversary operating within understood parameters. This was a natural disaster shaped like a teenager. In his command post, Callister watched the feed and felt the situation sliding. 20 agents. Positioned between the kid and the helicopter. And they were crumbling. He made a decision. The walkie-talkie felt heavier than usual. All units. Weapons free. Live ammunition authorized. A pause that lasted 1 heartbeat. You do not let that kid reach the armor. By any means necessary. The agents on the ground heard the order. Their hands moved from tranquilizer guns to the sidearms on their hips. Real weapons. Real bullets. The calculus had changed. Callister had decided that a dead Ethan Mercer, while a catastrophic loss of potential technology, was preferable to a living Ethan Mercer who escaped with all 3 inventions intact. Ethan saw the shift. The body language changed. The weapon profiles changed. The intent changed. Callister's given up on taking me alive. His reaction time saved him. In the time it took the first agent to clear his holster, Ethan was already at the line of pursuit vehicles. He gripped the edge of a car door, planted his foot against the frame, and pulled. The door came off the car with a shriek of tearing metal, hinges ripping free, wiring snapping. A slab of bulletproof steel and reinforced glass, roughly the size of a dining table. He raised it in front of his body just as the first volley hit. The impacts were brutal. Each bullet transferred its kinetic energy through the door and into Ethan's arms. For a normal person, the cumulative force would have been lethal. The vibration alone would have shattered bones, dislocated joints, turned muscle into pulp. Ethan held. Enhanced muscle density absorbed the recoil. Reinforced bone structure transmitted the force without breaking. The car door, designed to stop bullets, did its job. And the moon behind it, designed by a serum that exceeded every parameter of human biology, did his. He pushed forward. Step by step, through a hail of gunfire, the car door ringing like a bell with every impact, Ethan advanced on the remaining agents. The sight broke something in their confidence. A man walking through sustained automatic fire, protected by a car door he'd torn off with his bare hands, advancing with the measured inevitability of something that couldn't be stopped. "Don't your wrists get tired?" Ethan muttered behind the door. The moment the firing paused, reloading, even done in shifts, created gaps. Ethan surged from behind the shield. He took hits. Several bullets found their mark on his exposed limbs and torso. The impacts stung. Some drew blood. But the enhanced muscle density that the serum had built into every fiber of his body did what it was designed to do. The bullets penetrated the outer tissue and stopped. Flattened against muscle so dense it functioned as biological armor. Not lethal. Unless the caliber was large enough to overwhelm the density, or the bullet found an unprotected vital point like the eyes or temple. Under the disbelieving stares of agents who'd just watched their bullets fail to drop a target, Ethan crouched low. He gripped the car door. And threw it. Not like the javelin. This was a discus. The door spun horizontally, a massive rotating slab of bulletproof steel, covering a swath of the parking lot that was impossible to dodge entirely. Agents scattered. Some made it. Several didn't. The door clipped them as it passed, and the force of even a glancing blow from a spinning car door propelled by a super soldier was enough to break ribs, dislocate shoulders, and end any further participation in the fight. The ones who dived clear were still on the ground when Ethan reached them. He didn't give them time to recover. Low, fast, closing distance the way a predator closes distance, not with aggression but with inevitability. 3 minutes. 20 agents. Every one of them down. Some unconscious. Some injured. Some staring at the sky with the blank expression of people whose worldview had been restructured more violently than their bodies. The price Ethan paid, several bullet wounds of varying depth across his arms and torso. Blood on his clothes. Pain that the serum was already beginning to manage, the enhanced healing working in real time to close what it could and stabilize what it couldn't. But he wasn't looking at his wounds. He was looking at the helicopter. The rotors were at full speed. The skids had left the ground. The aircraft was rising 2 meters, 3 meters, the cargo bay door still open, the Mark II visible inside. In his command post, Callister watched the helicopter clear the helipad, and felt the tension drain from his body. The kid was incredible. The fight had been unlike anything Callister had witnessed in 30 years of military service. 20 trained agents, armed with live ammunition, defeated in 3 minutes by a single unarmed teenager. If that kid had appeared on a real battlefield with proper weapons and time to prepare, Callister had no doubt he could have dismantled an entire company without taking meaningful damage. But none of that mattered now. The helicopter was airborne. The armor was leaving. And without the armor, Ethan Mercer was a super soldier stranded on foreign soil with no way home. Callister was already calculating his promotion trajectory. Vice President seemed conservative. With 3 technologies to offer the President: reactor, armor, serum, the path to the highest office in the Republic was wide open. Then the Signal Bee's camera caught something that stopped the promotion fantasy mid-sentence. On the ground, Ethan was moving. Not running away. Not collapsing. Not surrendering. He was running toward the helicopter. And then he jumped. Not a normal jump. A vertical leap powered by legs that could sprint at 60 kilometers per hour and survive 10-story falls. A jump that carried a human body upward with enough velocity to close the gap between the ground and a helicopter that was already 5 meters in the air and climbing. Ethan's hands caught the edge of the open cargo bay door. His fingers closed on the metal. Chapter 71, Chapter 70, dragging down the helicopter, battle armor secured. 1381 words for advanced chapters /Patreon. com/handsomeduckgod. In the live broadcast, millions of people watched Ethan Mercer leap for a helicopter and felt their hearts break. 1 step short. Just 1 step. He was so close. The armor was right there. Is the Republic really going to lose him? Wait, what is he doing? Ethan's left hand caught a thick railing on the helipad structure. His right hand caught the helicopter's landing gear. His body stretched between them like a bridge, arms spread, every muscle in his enhanced frame engaged in a single, impossible act of defiance. He was trying to stop a helicopter from taking off. With his hands. In the live broadcast, the reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He's lost it. The failure broke him. He's venting. He can't accept being one step away. Nobody can hold a helicopter. Not even with the serum. At the bureau, Graves and the Chancellor stared at the screen and shook their heads. In their assessment, this was desperation. The raw, anguished response of a teenager who'd fought through 20 agents, survived a 10-story fall, and run down a truck on foot, only to watch his one-way home lift off the ground without him. At the Hargrove residence, Marcus was on the edge of his chair, hands white-knuckled on the armrests. "Kid, keep going. This is the last step. Hold on and you go home." Inside the helicopter, the pilot was running out of explanations for what his instruments were telling him. The engines were at maximum power. Full throttle. The rotor system was generating enough lift to carry nearly 3 tons of cargo while maintaining altitude. This was a hospital helicopter, but its specifications were military adjacent. The traction force was sufficient to drag heavy equipment at full flight speed. And the helicopter was not ascending. The pilot had followed his orders without sentiment. He didn't care about the teenager hanging from his landing gear. From the moment he'd received the command to transport the armor, he'd pushed the stick to maximum, fully prepared for the boy's grip to fail, his arms to tear, his body to drop. None of that happened. The control stick was maxed. The engines were screaming. And the helicopter was hovering at 3 meters, held in place by a single person pulling from below. The pilot stared at his instruments. Then at the figure beneath him. Then back at his instruments. What kind of monster is down there? Ethan's face was crimson. Veins stood out on his neck and forearms like cables. His enhanced muscle fibers were operating at absolute capacity, every cell burning glucose at a rate that would have killed a normal human from oxygen debt alone. If the helicopter's thrust increased by even a fraction more, his grip would fail. But it wasn't increasing. The engines had plateaued. The machine had reached its limit. And Ethan hadn't reached his. He took a breath. Drew it deep into lungs that could process oxygen 3 times more efficiently than they had a month ago. Felt the air fill him, felt the energy find his muscles. Then he pulled. His left arm, anchored to the helipad railing, became the fulcrum. His right arm, locked onto the landing gear, became the lever. And the force that flowed through both was generated by a body that had been rebuilt from the cellular level upward by the most advanced biochemistry the system had ever downloaded. The helicopter descended. Not falling. Not crashing. Being pulled. Inch by inch, meter by meter, dragged out of the sky by a teenager whose muscles were generating force in excess of what the rotor system could overcome. The hospital staff watching from the windows were going to need their own neurology department before the day was over. The pilot panicked. He ripped off his helmet and threw it at the figure below. "Let go, you." Ethan, hit by the flying debris, tilted his head up. His face was a mask of effort, veins pulsing, teeth bared, eyes burning. "I don't understand you're saying." He pulled harder. The helicopter slammed into the helipad. The impact ruptured the fuel lines. The rotors, still spinning at full speed, shattered against the concrete and sent fragments in every direction. Fire erupted from the engine housing. The cargo bay buckled. An instant before the crash, Ethan released both grips and threw himself sideways, rolling clear of the explosion radius with the desperate speed of a man who'd just fought for 10 straight minutes, and had exactly enough energy left to not die in the finale. Smoke engulfed the helipad. In his command post, Callister felt the world tilt. The boy dragged a helicopter out of the sky with his bare hands. That's not a human being. That's a weapon system that happens to have a face. How long until the nearest reinforcement unit reaches? His staff, terrified by his expression, answered quickly. 3 to 5 minutes, sir. 3 to 5 minutes. The kid had gone from the conference room to the helipad in 10 minutes flat. Killed the Whitfields, disabled 6 agents, fought through 20 more, chased a truck on foot, survived a 10-story fall, stopped a helicopter, and recovered his armor. In 10 minutes. No reinforcement on Earth could have responded fast enough. Callister could only do one thing: pray. Pray that the kid died in the explosion. Pray that the armor was destroyed. Under the gaze of every eye in the world, the smoke cleared. In the depths of the haze, a pale blue light ignited. The reactor. Then the eye slits. Then the full silhouette. Red and gold, catching the firelight, standing in the center of the wreckage like it had been waiting there all along. Ethan's voice came through the armor's external speakers, broadcast by the signal B to every screen on the planet. The feeling of being back is not bad at all. The live broadcast detonated. He got the armor back. From the hands of the Aurelian Republic. He took it back. Fusion reactor. Battle armor. Super soldier serum. 3 inventions. Every single one a miracle. Professor Mercer is not human. He is a god. At the bureau, Graves sat down very slowly. The resignation letter he'd been composing in his head disintegrated. Chancellor Thayer, standing beside him, was already on the phone. Deploy warships and fighter jets to the eastern seaboard, along the edge of our territorial waters. If Mercer makes it back to the coast, I want protection in place the moment he crosses into our airspace. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. This is not a request. This is a direct order from the Chancellor. The Chief of Staff, who had served Thayer for years, and had never heard him prioritize a single person's safety with this level of urgency, understood. He went to make the calls. In the ruins of St. John's Hospital helipad, Ethan stood in the Mark II and ran a systems check. The armor had taken damage in the crash. Some of it. Not enough to matter. The reactor was stable. The flight systems were operational. The weapons were charged. He was battered. Bullet wounds. The residual ache of dragging a helicopter out of the sky. But the serum was already working, accelerating healing, managing pain, restoring function. He had his armor. He had his body. He had a clear sky above him, and an ocean between here and home. Time to leave. In his command post, Callister stared at the armored figure on the screen with bloodshot eyes. I haven't lost. His voice was a rasp. The voice of a man who'd watched every plan fail, every advantage evaporate, and every assumption about what was possible get destroyed by a teenager. Mercer is not leaving this country alive. He turned to the staff member beside him. Connect me to the East Coast Military Command. Immediately. The staff member, looking at a defense secretary who appeared ready to bite through steel, stammered an acknowledgement and went to make the connection. Callister stared at the screen. At the red and gold figure, standing in the wreckage, preparing to fly. Just wait, Mercer. You're not going home. Chapter 72, Chapter 71, Medium. 1193 words for advanced chapters/Patreon. com/handsomeduckgod. The Mark II erupted from the hospital helipad like a comet fired from the ground up. The reinforcements that arrived seconds too late found a parking lot full of unconscious agents, a burning helicopter, and an armored figure already climbing past rooftop altitude. The lead agent took one look at the devastation and ordered his team to open fire. Better equipment this time. Heavier caliber. Armor-piercing rounds. The kind of ammunition that could shred light vehicles and punch through concrete. Against the Mark II's gold titanium alloy, every round pinged off like hail on a tank. The agent stopped the barrage and reached into his vehicle for something larger. A shoulder-launched weapon. Designed for exactly this kind of target. Ethan saw it. He raised his left palm. The repulsor fired before the agent could pull the trigger. The weapon detonated in the man's hands. The blast radius engulfed the cluster of vehicles and agents around it. Not lethal at that distance, the repulsor had been aimed at the launcher, not the people, but enough to scatter the formation and eliminate any further pursuit from the ground. Ethan climbed into the sky, trailing contrails, and left St. John's Hospital behind. At altitude, the armor's heads-up display populated with radar data. Dozens of kilometers ahead, between Ethan and the open ocean, a constellation of light dots was forming. Organized. The signature pattern of a military combat formation. Callister had been busy. Ethan studied the display and felt a cold focus settle over him. The Mark II was a significant upgrade over Mark I in every dimension: defense, weapons, reactor efficiency, sensor capability. But the formation ahead wasn't two jets with light missiles. It was a full naval air response. He didn't feel fear. He felt the specific, electric anticipation of a man about to test a machine he'd built against the best the opposition could throw at it. Eagle 1, Eagle 2, launch. Colonel Stankin, commanding the interception operation from the carrier ARS Morley, gave the order with the flat authority of a career officer who'd been waiting for exactly this assignment. Two fighters screamed off the carrier deck and climbed toward the incoming target. Remember, soldiers. This target humiliated our Air Force last time. 2 jets destroyed. 2 pilots killed. Our reputation hasn't recovered. This time, we end it. Sink him into the ocean in front of the entire world. The pilots acknowledged. Their weapon bays carried hardware that made the previous engagement's lightweight missiles look like party favors. Large-caliber machine guns. And medium-weight air-to-air missiles with enough explosive force to collapse a residential building. This wasn't a repeat of the verification meeting. This was an execution. The 2 jets closed on Ethan head-on. No hesitation. No warning shots. No communication. The pilots pressed their launch buttons the moment they had tone. A missile detached from the lead jet's bay. Nearly the height of a man. Its rocket motor ignited instantly, and the weapon accelerated toward Ethan at multiples of the speed of sound, trailing white exhaust against the gray sky. Inside the armor, Ethan's display flagged the incoming threat, and his expression went serious. Medium-weight missile. This wasn't the lightweight ordnance from the verification meeting. This was a weapon designed to kill armored vehicles, destroy hardened targets, and punch craters meters deep into solid ground. A direct hit from this would test the Mark II's limits in ways Ethan wasn't eager to discover. Taking it head-on was a gamble he couldn't afford. He banked hard and climbed, accelerating vertically. In the cockpits, the pilots smirked. Evasion through direction change was the most basic response, and against Aurelian missile tracking technology, the most futile. The weapons guidance system registered the target's vector shift and adjusted instantly, curving upward in pursuit. The missile followed. Heat-seeking. Radar-guided. Dual-track. The most advanced targeting system the Aurelian Republic deployed on carrier-based ordnance. In the live broadcast, hearts stopped. He can't outrun it. That missile is huge. Multiple times larger than the one from the verification meeting. It has tracking. He can't just dodge. The power on that warhead is enough to flatten a building. 5 kilometers behind Ethan. Inside the armor, Ethan watched the closing distance on his display with the focus calm of a man who was not panicking but waiting. Waiting for the right moment. The missile entered optimal range. Countermeasure flares. A disc-shaped housing on the armor's right leg assembly popped open, and a cloud of decoy flares erupted into the air behind the Mark II. Dozens of them, each one burning at temperatures designed to overwhelm the missile's heat-seeking guidance, creating a wall of false targets between the warhead and its actual objective. The missile's guidance system processed the new data. Hundreds of heat signatures where there had been one. Its tracking algorithms, sophisticated as they were, couldn't distinguish the real target from the decoys in the fraction of a second available. It chose wrong. The detonation lit the sky a kilometer behind Ethan. Shrapnel fanned outward in a sphere, and even at that distance, fragments peppered the Mark II's hull with metallic pings that the armor's sensors registered as surface impacts. No penetration. In the live broadcast, the relief was visceral. He dodged it. Countermeasure flares. The armor has countermeasure flares. This isn't just armor, it's a complete weapons platform. On the ARS Morley, Colonel Stankin's composure cracked. Decoy flares. The suit has decoy flares. This wasn't a flying strongman. This was a miniaturized fighter aircraft wrapped around a human body, equipped with the same defensive systems that full-sized military jets carried. Whoever had built this thing had designed it for exactly this scenario. The colonel couldn't let this target reach open water. All fighter jets of Eagle Squadron. Full deployment. I don't care about the cost. Intercept and destroy. The ARS Morley's flight deck erupted into organized chaos. One by one, then in pairs, then in waves, nearly 40 fighter jets launched from the carrier's catapults and climbed into the afternoon sky. They formed up at altitude. A wall of metal and thrust, arranged in overlapping defensive layers that covered every approach angle, every altitude band, every possible escape vector. 40 jets against one suit of armor. In the live broadcast, the signal B captured the formation from a distance, a dark mass of aircraft, circling like vultures, filling the sky between Ethan and the open ocean. 40 jets. That's enough for a conventional war. How can one person get through that? It's over. Even with the flares, even with the armor, 40 jets is 40 jets. The formation tightened as Ethan approached. The jets closed around him from every direction. Above, below, left, right, ahead, behind. A sphere of hostile aircraft, each one armed with the missiles and guns that had been specifically loaded to counter the Mark II's demonstrated capabilities. From a distance, the Signal B's camera showed a single red and gold dot, surrounded on all sides by a swarm of gray shapes. A beast in a cage. No visible way out. Chapter 73, Chapter 72, Ethan surrenders, infrared laser 1871 words. Ethan was trapped inside the swarm. The 40 jets operated with a coordination that told him everything he needed to know about their preparation. This wasn't improvised. This wasn't a scrambled response. The Aurelian Republic had been training for exactly this scenario, since the day the Mark I was demonstrated at the verification meeting. Containment doctrine against a flexible, high-speed armored target. They'd had months to develop it, and they'd used that time well. He tried to accelerate, to break through the formation's perimeter. 80 20mm machine guns opened fire simultaneously. Not aimed fire. Saturation fire. A wall of metal traveling at hypersonic velocity from every direction, the combined kinetic energy of 40 aircraft pouring concentrated destruction into a sphere approximately 50 meters in diameter. The sheer volume of rounds created a cage of force that no amount of agility could navigate. The Mark II could withstand individual bullets. It could shrug off dozens. But 80 guns firing thousands of rounds per second was a mathematical equation that had nothing to do with toughness and everything to do with cumulative force. The impacts didn't need to penetrate. They just needed to push. Ethan was shoved back to the center of the formation like a ball bearing rattled inside a drum. On the ARS Morley, Colonel Stankin allowed himself a thin smile. This was his doctrine. Boiling a frog. The armor was tough. Everyone knew that. But toughness was a finite resource, and the colonel's strategy was simple: don't try to kill it with one blow. Wear it down. Maintain constant, overwhelming pressure from every angle. Let quantity achieve what quality couldn't. And it was working. Dents were forming across the Mark II's surface. Shallow at first, then deeper. The electronic systems began issuing warnings: surface integrity compromised in multiple zones. Structural damage accumulating. The gold titanium alloy was holding, but it was holding the way a dam holds against rising water, with diminishing margin and increasing strain. At the bureau, Graves watched the feed with his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Every instinct screamed at him to order the Valerian warships, already positioned at the territorial boundary, to cross into Aurelian waters. He couldn't. Even if they crossed, the Aurelian Republic's naval supremacy in its own waters was unquestionable. Valerian warships entering Aurelian territory would be outnumbered, outgunned, and outpositioned. They might not save Ethan. They would almost certainly start a war. A war with casualties in the millions. Over one person. Graves couldn't make that trade. No matter how valuable the person. The powerlessness was suffocating. In everyday politics, his authority moved mountains. In a military confrontation of this magnitude, he was a spectator. In the live broadcast, the silence was worse than any outcry. Can Professor Mercer still come back? Nobody answered. Nobody could. Even the anti-fans had gone quiet. National interest had a way of making petty grievances feel very small. Inside the armor, Ethan assessed his options with the cold clarity that the serum provided even under extreme stress. Option 1, kick off the jets one at a time with palm repulsors, the way he'd handled the 2 fighters at the verification meeting. The math killed it immediately. 40 jets. Each repulsor shot drained the reactor significantly. The single blast that destroyed a fighter during the verification meeting had caused the reactor to dim. 40 jets would require more energy than 2 or 3 reactors could provide. And the armor's defense wouldn't survive long enough to fire that many shots under sustained bombardment. Option 2, break through the formation using speed. Dead on arrival. The coordinated fire pushed him back faster than the armor could accelerate. The formation was designed to prevent exactly this. Option 3. The laser system. The Mark II's forearm assemblies housed integrated infrared laser arrays, the offensive weapons that the government had authorized for the military specification suit. Ethan had installed identical systems in his own Mark II during the parallel build. He'd never fired them. Never tested them in combat. The theoretical specifications were extraordinary, but theory and reality were separated by a gap that usually contained things like unexpected failure modes and catastrophic overload. The electronic system screamed another warning. 2 more surface sections had crossed into critical damage thresholds. No more time for theory. Ethan raised his hands. From the outside, it looked like surrender. Both arms lifted, palms open, the universal gesture of capitulation. The battle armor hung motionless in the center of the formation, battered and dented, its pilot apparently accepting the inevitable. On the ARS Morley, Stankin laughed. Ethan Mercer. The kid who'd torn through the Aurelian Department of Defense, killed the Whitfield brothers, dragged a helicopter out of the sky, and fought his way to the Mark II through 20 armed agents. Surrendering. In Stankin's encirclement. The accomplishment tasted sweet. But Stankin had no intention of accepting the surrender. His orders were explicit: kill the target. The Aurelian Republic's leadership had calculated that the armor's wreckage would contain enough information to reverse engineer the technology eventually. A living Ethan Mercer was ideal. A dead one was acceptable. A free one was not. In the live broadcast, the Valerian audience fractured. He couldn't hold out. No shame in surrendering. Everyone wants to live. He's still a child. Fear of death is human. This is betrayal. He's giving up. If you're so brave, you go fight 40 fighter jets. Even if you wanted to betray your country, they wouldn't want you. The argument raged for exactly 3 more seconds. Then something changed on the screen. A red glow began to build in the armor's raised forearms. Not the pale blue of the reactor. Not the white-hot flash of the repulsors. A deep, concentrated crimson that intensified with each passing heartbeat, pouring from the armor's integrated laser arrays like blood-colored light leaking from a furnace. The color deepened. Brightened. The forearms of the Mark II were radiating visible energy, the air around them shimmering with heat distortion. Stankin saw it. The smile died on his face. 30 years of combat experience didn't need to understand the physics to recognize a weapon charging. All units expand the encirclement. Immediately. Medium-weight missiles, fire. Do not give him breathing room. The pilots reacted instantly. The formation expanded outward, jets pulling back to increase the distance between themselves and the target, creating space to avoid shrapnel from their own missile detonations. At the predetermined safe distance, 40 pilots pressed their launch buttons in synchronized precision, the product of countless drills designed for exactly this moment. 40 medium-weight missiles left their bays simultaneously. 40 trails of white exhaust, converging on a single point in the sky. The image was apocalyptic. A sphere of fire and smoke closing on a single red and gold figure from every direction. The kind of saturation strike that was designed to destroy hardened bunkers, carrier groups, and military installations. In the live broadcast, people left. Closed their screens. Turned away. They couldn't watch the moment the missiles hit. Chapter 73, killing in all directions. The terrified Colonel Stankin stared at the wreckage falling from the sky like metal rain. Inside the armor, Ethan watched the converging warheads on his display and felt the laser rays reach full charge. 1 second energy of red light, accumulation and complete. The entire Eagle squadron had ceased to exist. The Mark II rotated 360 degrees on its vertical axis, at a speed that turned the armored figure into a blur, and grabbed the radio himself. And from the outstretched forearms, Eagle 1 beam of concentrated infrared light swept outward in a perfect horizontal circle. Eagle 3, Eagle 4, the beam was invisible to the naked eye down the list, beyond the visible spectrum, methodically, but its effects were not. Compulsively, everything the beam touched as if ignited. Each call sign would somehow reverse what had happened. Fuel lines as ruptured. If the next frequency would produce warheads a voice detonated instead of a busy tone. 40 call members failed catastrophically. 40 attempts. The sweep took less than 1 second. Ethan lowered his set the radio down with the careful precision of a man who understood that if he let his hands do what they wanted, then the world exploded. And if they shook, everyone on the bridge would see. He couldn't let himself think about the red light. Every piece of military hardware if he thought about the red light detonated the way it had swept through metal and fuel, as if the sky itself had decided to come apart through paper. He would lose fireballs that a command in a ring around the point where Ethan hovered. The shockwaves colliding and reinforcing each other into a wall of force that shook the ocean surface below, and the Bureau of Internal Affairs headquarters, Director Graves laughed. 40 jets, not the controlled chuckle of a political professional. 0 survivors. A full, unmasked, building-shaking laugh that roared through the corridors and reached offices on floors above and below. Not from equipment failure. The staff didn't complain. From the absence of signals. Nobody complained. Every aircraft because under his command in the building was transmitting simultaneously, and every person in the building was feeling the same thing. His mouth opened, so intense it was indistinguishable no sound from joy. Out. A staff member in Graves' office started clapping. The ones who hadn't been able to look away as if unsure whether applause was appropriate. 1 second, for watching 40 jets and 40 missiles were converging on a single target. Then harder. The next second, joined, the sky was sound spread through the building like a wave. The second after that, gathering fire cleared and volume and a single red and gold that wasn't just motionless but a release. Center of a sphere of smoke guilt and falling debris, and self-recrimination, compressed into the sound silence of hands lasted 3 heartbeats. These were Bureau agents. Then the broadcast broke. Selected for not absolute loyalty. The audience trained to protect the Republic's most valuable assets. 40 jets. And they had failed. He wasn't surrendering. Had been kidnapped on their watch. He was charging. 14 of their colleagues had died. The armor the most important person in the Republic had been forced to fly across an ocean alone because the Bureau hadn't done its job. Every missile. They'd carried that weight for human being. The sidelong glances from other agencies. This is a natural disaster with the accusations. At the Bureau, the cold shoulders in meetings. And he didn't remember standing up. The knowledge in their own hearts his chair was several feet behind him. Chancellor Thayer, beside him, the mistake couldn't be undone. His eyes were fixed on the screen with an expression losing that contained something Graves had never seen. Some of the agents clapping had red eyes, pure, unfiltered. Nobody mentioned it. The most powerful military on the planet had surrounded Ethan's water glass everything it had. His knuckles had gone white. Everything it had. The laser, everything it had to destroy one armored teenager. One flash, and in 1 second, one rotation, he had erased all and an entire fighter formation plus 40 missiles had been eliminated. Marcus was on his feet. The physics community had theorized about military-grade laser applications. His hands were shaking, but those were conjectures. He'd studied military technology not even for 3 theoretical frameworks. He'd analyzed just idle speculation about what might be possible in a future that nobody expected to arrive on every major defense project in the Republic. Ethan Mercer had built it. Nothing in any of those reports into a suit of what he'd just watched. and used it to destroy
Nothing
a
in
carrier
any
group's
textbook,
air
any
wing in
research
under a
paper,
second.
any theoretical framework
Marcus's
accounted
mind
for
was
a
racing
weapon
through
system
implications
that could
so
destroy
fast
40
that his
military
body couldn't
aircraft
keep up.
simultaneously with a single
One
rotational
moment he was
sweep.
trembling with excitement.
The Mark
The
II
next he
wasn't
was
a suit of
slumped in
armor.
his chair, overwhelmed
It
by
was
the
a
sheer scale
strategic
of what he'd
asset.
just witnessed. One person,
In the bedroom,
wearing one suit,
Hargrove watched
had
his
just
son
demonstrated
through the doorway
the ability
with growing
to neutralize
concern.
a carrier group's
The
entire
boy was
air wing in
acting
under a
strange.
second.
The
Excited,
implications
then
for
deflated.
global military balance were
Gripping
so
his
profound
cup,
that Marcus's
then staring
mind
at
couldn't
nothing.
finish processing them.
Muttering
It
calculations
just
under
kept
his
running
breath.
the same calculation,
Getting
getting
the
the
same
same
answer,
perhaps,
and refusing to believe it.
an experiment gone wrong.
In the sky, Ethan
Some
hovered
kind
at the
of
center of a
breakdown.
dissipating cloud of smoke
Hargrove
and debris.
quietly retreated to his room.
Below him,
and
the
called
ocean
an old
surface
comrade
was
who
littered with
served
wreckage
as the
and
director of
parachutes.
neurology
Not
at a
all the
military
pilots had
hospital.
died in the detonations.
Old friend,
Some had
I
ejected
need you
in
to
the
clear
fractional
some time
time
between the beam hitting their
I
aircraft
think my son
and the
might need an
explosions that
evaluation.
followed.
Ahead
If
of
Marcus
him,
had heard
the
this
open
call,
ocean stretched
he would
toward
have
the
laughed
horizon
until his ribs hurt.
between here and
But
home.
Marcus was
there
too
was
busy
nothing
watching
left
the
to
most
stop him.
important broadcast in the
Don't
history
forget to like
of the
and
Republic
subscribe
to
to
notice
notice
his
his
father
Wonderland.
scheduling him for a psychiatric assessment. Inside the Mark II, Ethan was staring at the reactor readout with an expression that was significantly less triumphant than anyone watching would have expected. The laser sweep had consumed nearly half the reactor's remaining energy. Flying from Valoria to the Aurelian Republic, a distance of over 10,000 kilometers, had used a quarter. One laser rotation had used twice as much energy as crossing an ocean. Ethan's mouth twisted into a rueful grin. In the future, unless I'm genuinely out of options, that move stays in the vault. The infrared laser wasn't supposed to be here. In the Earth Prime memories, this weapon belonged to the Mark VI, the armor from Iron Man 2, several generations ahead of what Ethan currently had access to. He didn't have the Mark VI's construction data. But his understanding of infrared physics, combined with the system's foundational knowledge, had been enough to derive the weapon's operating principles and integrate a functional version into the Mark II. Functional. Devastatingly effective. And so energy-hungry that using it twice would leave the reactor dead. That was all he'd had. And he'd used it. If the carrier sent another formation, and he had to fight. He looked down through the clouds. The magnification systems in the helmet brought the ocean surface into focus. Below, the fleet of warships sat motionless. No jets on the catapults. No activity on the flight decks. The ARS Morley, which had launched 40 aircraft less than 10 minutes ago, was sitting still. The cold smile returned. They're scared. In truth, if the carrier had launched its remaining aircraft, it carried 85 total, and roughly 45 were still on board. Ethan would have had to run. Climb to 30,000 meters, above the ceiling of any fighter or missile, and simply fly home at altitude. At that height, nothing could touch him. But the bluff was working. The colonel on that carrier had just watched one sweep erase 40 jets. He didn't know the laser had a 2-shot limit. He didn't know the reactor was running low. All he knew was that the red light existed, and that everything it touched died. That was enough. On the ARS Morley, Callister's voice crackled through the bridge speakers. Colonel Stankin. Continue the pursuit. Immediately. Stankin's jaw tightened. After that strike, the reactor in the armor dimmed noticeably. Its energy reserves are depleted. This is our only chance. The analysis was sharp. Correct, even. Callister, from the mainland, had spotted the key detail that Stankin, drowning in shock, had missed. The laser had cost the armor dearly. But Stankin wasn't thinking about energy levels. He was thinking about the 40 call signs that had gone silent. The carrier had launched 85 aircraft in its service life across dozens of operations. In the last 5 minutes, it had lost 40 of them. Nearly half its air wing, gone in a single second. If Stankin sent the remaining 45 and the kid had another trick, another weapon, another sweep, another thing that nobody had predicted, then the ARS Morley would be an aircraft carrier with 0 aircraft. $1 billion warship turned into a floating parking lot. His career. His command. His reputation. All of it balanced on a coin flip. Did you hear me?
Launch everything. Stankin stared at the tactical display. At the single dot moving away from his position. At the empty spaces where 40 other dots had been. He said nothing. At 10,000 meters, Ethan turned the Mark II toward the Signal B's camera. The armor was battered. Scorched from 40 missiles worth of nearby detonations. Bullet impacts from the hospital fight. Scrapes from the 10-story fall. It looked like it had been through a war, which was accurate because it had. But the reactor was glowing. The eye slits were lit. And the voice that came through the external speakers was the voice of a teenager who'd flown across an ocean, killed 2 traitors, fought through the Aurelian Republic's Department of Defense, dragged a helicopter out of the sky, destroyed an entire fighter squadron, and was now heading home. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Callister. A grin behind the faceplate. No need to see me off. I'm afraid the goodbye would be too emotional for you. He turned the Mark II east. Toward the open ocean. Toward home. Chapter 75, Chapter 74, A Smooth Return, Everlasting Applause 1722 words for advanced chapters /Patreon. com/handsome duck god. Hearing Ethan's parting words through the broadcast feed, Defense Secretary Andrew Callister felt something rupture inside his chest that might have been metaphorical, and might not have been. He coughed. Tasted copper. Looked down at his hand and saw red. The staff in the room pretended not to notice their boss spitting blood into a handkerchief. Some things, once witnessed, could not be unwitnessed, and nobody in this building wanted to be the person who'd seen the defense secretary break. Callister's face went the color of old cement. He'd had the kid. In his building. In his conference room. Out of the armor. Surrounded by agents. Every advantage imaginable. And the kid had killed 2 people, disabled 26 agents, jumped off a building, chased a truck on foot, dragged a helicopter out of the sky, suited up, evaded a missile, and destroyed an entire fighter squadron. Then said, "Thank you for your hospitality," and flew away. Callister understood, with the specific clarity that comes to men whose careers are ending, that this was the last day he would hold this office. His political enemies would circle. The opposition parties would demand investigations. The president would need a scapegoat. And the man who'd lost a teenager, 2 Whitfield assets, 40 fighter jets, and the Republic's international reputation in a single afternoon, was the most obvious scapegoat in the history of the Aurelian Republic. Almost certainly prison. In the presidential residence, Harrison Wolfe sat behind his desk and stared at nothing. The preparation had been extensive. The Whitfield defection. The kidnapping. The intelligence operation. The military deployment. Months of planning, billions in resources, the full weight of the Aurelian Republic's intelligence and military apparatus, all focused on acquiring 3 technologies from one teenager. And the teenager had walked through it like it wasn't there. The ARS Morley had lost an entire fighter formation. 40 aircraft. The economic loss alone was staggering. But the real damage wasn't financial. It was the Signal B footage, broadcast in real time to every screen on the planet, showing the Aurelian Republic's military being systematically dismantled by a single armored figure. The world had watched. Every ally. Every rival. Every voter. Wolfe's re-election, which had seemed assured 6 hours ago, was now a question mark. The political family behind his candidacy would be reassessing their support. The opposition would be sharpening their knives. And the international community would be recalibrating their assessment of Aurelian military capability based on the fact that one teenager in a homemade suit had just fought through everything the Republic could throw at him and flown away making jokes. Hours passed. The Aurelian coastline fell behind. The ocean stretched ahead, gray and endless, and the Mark II flew east at an altitude of 10,000 meters with a reactor that was running on fumes. The electronic system had graduated from polite warnings to urgent alarms. Energy reserves were critically low. The reactor's glow, which had been steady and bright when Ethan launched from the hospital, was now a dim pulse that flickered with every course correction. If Ethan tried to fly all the way back to Ashford City, the reactor would die somewhere over the open ocean, and the Mark II would drop into the sea like a very expensive stone. The serum meant the fall wouldn't kill him. But the signal bee was still filming, and being fished out of the ocean like a drowning cat, after the most spectacular military escape in history, was not the ending this story deserved. Then Graves' voice erupted inside the helmet. The volume was so excessive that the armor's internal speakers distorted. "Director Graves, it's a good thing I've been injected with the serum. If I hadn't, that shout would have made me permanently deaf." On the other end, Graves made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and entirely unlike anything Ethan had ever heard from the moon. From the moment Ethan had escaped the desert laboratory, Graves had expected to lose him. The kid was flying into the territory of a superpower that had already demonstrated it was willing to fire missiles at him. The defense secretary had decades of experience breaking foreign operatives. The military had carriers, fighters, and the will to use them. Nobody came back from that. Not in Graves' experience. Not in anyone's experience. "Stop with the jokes. You jumped off a 10-story building and walked away. You're telling me 2 shouts from me could damage your hearing?" Ethan grinned behind the faceplate. What happened to being a dignified leader? Since when does the director of the bureau use that kind of language? Graves' voice steadied. Professional mode, reasserting itself over the emotion. "Change heading to your current southeast. Our ships are waiting. They'll bring you in." Ethan didn't argue. The reactor readout was blinking red in a way that suggested suggestions had become demands, and the warship was a lot closer than Ashford City. He adjusted course and pushed the armor to its maximum sustainable speed. 20 kilometers. Then, at the edge of his vision, emerging from the haze where the sea met the sky, a flag. Red and gold against gray water. The Republic of Valoria's naval ensign, flying from the mast of a destroyer that was cutting through the waves at full speed toward his position. Ethan looked at the flag and felt something in his chest unlock that he hadn't realized was clenched. He was home. The Mark II descended toward the warship in a controlled dive, shedding altitude in a long, graceful arc that ended with a landing on the forward deck that was precise enough to earn a nod from the flight operations officer. The soldiers rushed forward immediately. Most of them had seen the armor in videos. Press coverage from the verification meeting. The signal bee footage from earlier today. But seeing it in person was different. The scale of it. The presence. The way the reactor's glow cast blue light across the deck plates. And the damage. The Mark II looked like it had been through a war. Because it had. Bullet impacts from the hospital fight peppered the torso and limbs. Dents from the sustained 20mm cannon fire covered the shoulders and back. Scorch marks from the missile detonations blackened the legs. The surface that had been smooth red and gold was now scarred, pitted, and worn. But it was standing. The reactor was glowing. And the moon inside was alive. The senior officers on deck looked at the armor with the specific intensity of military professionals who understood exactly what they were seeing. They'd watched the broadcast. They'd seen the infrared laser erase 40 jets in 1 second. And they were thinking the same thought, running the same calculation, arriving at the same conclusion. For years, the Aurelian Republic had sailed carrier groups through contested waters because they could. Because 11 carrier battle groups represented naval supremacy that no nation could challenge. Today, one suit of armor had broken through an entire carrier group's air wing. Tens of millions in materials. Against a carrier worth 5 billion. If there were 8 of these suits. Or 20. The mathematics of naval power would need to be rewritten from scratch. The armor opened. Ethan stepped out. He was 18 years old. His clothes were torn. His body was bruised and bleeding from bullet wounds that were already healing. His hair was matted with sweat. He looked like a kid who'd been in a fight, which was accurate, except the fight had been against the most powerful military on the planet. The senior officers looked at this boy and understood something that transcended rank, age, and protocol. This young man, when faced with the combined threats and inducements of a superpower, hadn't bent. Hadn't yielded. Hadn't considered, even for a moment, trading his knowledge for his safety. He'd fought his way out. Through all of it. And come home. The commanding officer started clapping. The sound was sharp in the sea air. One pair of hands. Then another. Then 50. Then the entire deck crew, officers and enlisted alike, hundreds of people who'd sailed through the night to be in this exact position at this exact moment, all of them applauding at once. Some of them whistled. Some of them chanted his name. A few of the younger sailors, who'd grown up watching the verification meeting footage and considered Ethan Mercer a personal hero, were crying openly and didn't care who saw. Ethan felt his face go red. He pressed his hands together and bowed slightly. Thank you. Thank you for coming all this way to bring me home. The applause didn't stop. Layer upon layer until the sound filled the deck and echoed off the superstructure and carried across the water to the escort ships flanking them, where more crews were watching from their own rails, adding their own voices. In the live broadcast, the Valerian public joined. Not in sound, they were watching on screens, in homes and offices and cafes across the Republic, but in something that felt like sound. A collective exhale. A nation that had spent 12 hours holding its breath, watching one of its own fight through the impossible, finally allowed to breathe again. Standing on the deck of a Valerian warship, surrounded by applause, with the reactor's blue light fading behind him, and the ocean stretching toward a home he'd earned the right to return to, Ethan thought about the choice he'd made. Other countries had more resources. Better facilities. Larger budgets. The Aurelian Republic had offered him everything a scientist could want: funding, laboratories, freedom to research. But looking at the people on this deck, the sailors who'd sailed through the night, the officers who were clapping until their palms were raw, the signal be transmitting his face to millions of people who'd stayed up to watch him come home, Ethan knew his choice had been right. This was where he belonged. Not because Valoria was perfect. Not because it was the most powerful, or the wealthiest, or the most advanced. Because these were his people. And they'd come for him. Chapter 76, Chapter 75, Level 2 Mall Unlocking, Ethan's Reverse Scale 1625 Words for Advanced Chapters /Patreon. com/HandsomeDuck got on the deck, the applause continued for a full 3 minutes. Well done. Incredible work, young man. Standing up to a superpower without flinching, this is the standard our generation should aspire to. Ethan lost count of how many times he said thank you. Finally, the senior officers gave the order and the crew dispersed back to their stations, though several of them found excuses to walk past the Mark II one more time on the way. The officers themselves lingered, eyeing the battered armor with the particular hunger of military professionals who understood exactly what it represented. But they were field-grade officers, not senior enough to influence where the armor program went from here. The smart play was to leave a good impression on the kid who built it. His word carried more weight than anyone else's on the question of production and deployment. Over Ethan's protests, they steered him into the captain's private lounge and told him to rest. There were still several hours before they reached port. Not that Ethan needed the rest. Nearly 10 hours of travel and combat would have destroyed a normal human, but the serum had rebuilt his stamina along with everything else. His body felt like it could go another 10. His mind, though, had somewhere else to be. He turned off the signal B, closed his eyes, and opened the system. The familiar interface materialized in his mind's eye. Prestige, 498,390. Note: prestige increase is linked to the emotional responses of people in this world. Shock, admiration, hatred, awe, any strong emotion caused by the host's actions generates prestige. Items: none. Level 1 mall upgradable, 150,000 prestige. Small nuclear reactor technology, Marvel Universe, Iron Man Series, 1000 Prestige, exchanged, Battle Armor Mark I Manufacturing Technology, First Generation Iron Man Suit, 10,000 Prestige, exchanged, Battle Armor Mark II Manufacturing Technology, Second Generation Suit, drawback, cannot perform high-altitude flight, 20,000 Prestige, exchanged, Battle Armor Mark III Manufacturing Technology, Third Generation Suit, classic red and gold design, equipped with infrared lasers and miniature missiles, extremely strong combat power, 50,000 Prestige, exchanged, Super Soldier Serum, Captain America, 100,000 Prestige, exchanged. Ethan stared at the number. 498,390. He'd started the day at 79,900. The Aurelian Republic operation had generated over 400,000 prestige in a single day. Nearly 500,000. From one afternoon of terrifying the entire planet. The kid who hadn't flinched while surrounded by 40 fighter jets felt his breathing quicken at a number on a screen. I've completely turned my life around. Tomorrow at breakfast, I'm ordering 2 bowls of congee. Stare at the other. Just because I can. He upgraded the mall without hesitation. Asterisk, mall upgrading. Time remaining, 8 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. A countdown. 9 hours until Level 2 opened. The Level 1 mall had given him a fusion reactor, 3 generations of Iron Man armor, and Captain America's Super Soldier Serum. 5 items that had allowed a 17-year-old from Millbrook County to challenge a superpower and win. What would Level 2 contain? The question was a physical itch. The more he thought about it, the worse it got. Speculation was useless without data, and the countdown wasn't going to move faster because he was excited. He flopped onto the captain's bunk and closed his eyes. Sleep was always the best cure for an agonizing wait. He woke 2 hours later. The warship had entered port. 2 hours of sleep after a day like today should have left him groggy and disoriented. Instead, he felt sharp. Fully recharged. The serum's recovery enhancement applied to rest as efficiently as it applied to everything else. He said his goodbyes to the crew, stepped off the gangway, and set foot on Valerian soil. Half a day. He'd been gone for half a day. But the ground beneath his feet felt different from when he'd left. More solid. The particular warmth of a place that was yours, not because you owned it but because it owned you. Outside the port gate, a bureau car was waiting. The driver's window was down. Behind the wheel sat Director Nathan Graves. Ethan stopped walking. Director Graves, what are you? This is too much. You didn't need to come personally. Graves looked at him through the window with an expression that communicated nothing and everything. Stop talking and get in the car. Ethan got in the car. The drive from the military port to Ashford City was roughly 300 kilometers. Graves drove at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, the kind of driving that suggested a man who wanted the journey to take exactly as long as it needed to. They didn't talk. Ethan had met Graves 3 times, including today. They didn't have the kind of relationship that produced easy conversation. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who understood each other well enough to not need words, and not well enough to know which words to use. The sky darkened as they drove. City lights appeared. Ashford City materialized from the highway like a photograph developing. Graves pulled up outside Ethan's neighborhood. The engine idled. Ethan opened the door, then paused. Director Graves, it's late. Why don't you come in and rest? You can head back in the morning. Graves didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it. The match flared orange in the dark car. He shook his head. Ethan felt the awkwardness of a conversation that wasn't quite happening. He was about to say goodbye when Graves exhaled a stream of smoke and spoke. Thank you. 2 words. Not loud enough to carry beyond the car. Ethan understood what they meant. Not thank you for coming home. Not thank you for the technology. Something more specific and more personal. Thank you for not dying. Thank you for not making my failure permanent. Thank you for coming back so I don't have to live with losing you. Before Ethan could formulate a response, something gracious, something that acknowledged the weight behind those two words, Graves rolled up the window and pulled away from the curb with the decisive speed of a man who had used up his entire emotional vocabulary for the year and needed to leave before the deficit became visible. Ethan stood alone on the sidewalk, watching the taillights shrink. He'd never seen someone say, "thank you," that aggressively. Less than 2 hours remained on the level 2 mall countdown. Ethan wanted to go home and wait. But he had a stop to make first. Frank and Linda's apartment was a 15-minute walk. He didn't bother knocking. He had a key, and the Holloway household had stopped treating locked doors as a meaningful barrier years ago. "I'm starving. What's for dinner?" The sound of his voice brought Frank and Linda out of the back room, at a speed that suggested they'd been sitting in there specifically waiting to hear it. Frank looked at Ethan. Confirmed, alive, standing, intact. His expression settled into something that was mostly relief, and partly the residual fury of a man who'd spent weeks as a hostage because his nephew couldn't leave well enough alone. He was okay. Linda was not okay. The tears started before she reached the hallway and didn't stop when she got to the living room. "Useless," Frank muttered, watching his wife cry. "What are you crying for? The brat's back, isn't he?" Linda turned on him with the precision of a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of exposing her husband's hypocrisy. "I'm useless. I wonder who spent the entire day watching the live broadcast with hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold his tea. If this kid hadn't come back, I would have checked you into the hospital as a Parkinson's patient." "Woman, I was not shaking. You spilled 3 cups of tea on the carpet. The stains are still there." Ethan watched them bicker and felt the warmth settle into his chest like sunlight filling a room. He'd lost his parents at 4 years old. Everything he had, every meal, every scolding, every awkward expression of love disguised as criticism, had come from these two people. They'd raised him as their own son, and he regarded them as his second parents. Ethan's personality ran toward casual indifference. He joked through crises, deflected compliments, and treated most things in life as problems to be solved rather than emotions to be felt. But Frank and Linda were different. They were the line. Anyone who crossed it, who touched these two people, who threatened them, who used them as leverage, would discover that Ethan Mercer's casual indifference had a limit, and beyond that limit was something that didn't negotiate, didn't forgive, and didn't stop. Edgar and Conrad Whitfield had discovered this. Their necks could confirm. Linda fed him 3 dishes, a soup, and rice that had been kept warm for hours because she'd known he would come here before going home. He ate everything and asked for seconds. After dinner, with the level 2 mall countdown ticking toward 0, Ethan didn't linger. He hugged Linda, who cried again, clapped Frank on the shoulder, who grunted, and headed home. The night air was cool. Ashford City was quiet. The streetlights cast familiar patterns on familiar sidewalks. Ethan walked home with his hands in his pockets and a countdown running in his head. Less than an hour until level 2. Whatever came next, he was ready. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.